The Zamarakian Undercity, also known as Elite Dungeon 4, was released on the 4th of July in 2022. This was the final boss encounter release for the Elder God Wars dungeon and had an absolute ton of content packed all into one update. There was the full dungeon, which you can see the camera flying through right now, which was absolutely insane in terms of the amount of detail on the zone, the monsters, and all of the optional paths that you could take along the way, which came with challenging content for higher level players and also an enraged scaling mechanic through the dungeon too, and many other rewards which we'll talk about soon. But all of this led to the final encounter, which was Zamorak. You finally got to take on the Lord of Chaos himself in an epic battle, which is probably arguably one of the best boss encounters in the entire game. All of this sounds amazing, so you may be wondering why the title of this video is something along the lines of "this is the hugest piece of content waste in RuneScape history" or something along those lines. In this video I'm going to talk and discuss about Elite Dungeon 4, or the Zamarakian Undercity, and why I feel like this dungeon has gone absolutely to waste in terms of the amount of effort and likely time, probably company money, and missed opportunity that could have been included in this place. So with that being said, let's talk about it. Before moving on, here's the sponsor that you guys are probably going to be interested in, because this is RuneScape content that you can claim right now. Everybody loves cosmetics, and so if you want to get your hands on some free cosmetics, listen up. What you can see here is the Umbral Crypt Lord Staff, Sword, and Chakrams. Jagex have partnered with Zola to bring you these weapons for absolutely free. Yep, free. You just have to click a few buttons. Now this will only be available until the 18th of November, so there'll be a link in the pinned comment and the description where you can head down and claim this for absolutely free. And it's super easy. All you need to do is sign up to a Zola account, then click the claim button for your code, and then head over to your RuneScape account on the main page to redeem your code to get these items in game nice and easy. The easiest and safest way to do this is to click on account settings from your RuneScape in-game lobby. This just guarantees you end up on the correct page. Log into your account and then enter the code here to redeem it, and then boom, done. You have these unlocked in-game, ready to use. They're pretty nice. I do love the purple effect, and I mean, I also love free stuff, so get yours while you can before the 18th of November. And also, thank you very much, Zola, for sponsoring this video with your collaboration with Jagex. If you're someone who frequently visits the Zamarakian Undercity, chances are you only really come here to take on Zamorak himself. This is because this is the first elite dungeon of its type where you can actually skip the entire dungeon and go directly to the final boss, or in this case, the only actual boss in this dungeon. Along the way through the dungeon, you are going to have encounters with a couple of other bosses, I suppose you could call them, but they don't offer any valuable rewards and really are just in your way to delay you from reaching the final destination, being the fight with the Lord of Chaos. This is probably the biggest mistake in terms of actually releasing a dungeon into the game that Jagex made of Elite Dungeon 4, but we'll talk about that again in a little bit of time. The reason most people probably reference ED4 with specifically Zamorak, and if you are going to go take on the encounter, likely you would say, should we go kill Zami? Should we go kill Zamorak? Maybe we'll go do Zamorak, instead of saying let's do ED4, which you would say if you were going to take on the Ambassador. You'd say let's go to ED3. If you wanted to take on Seryu or the Blackstone Dragon, you would probably say let's go to ED1 or let's go to ED2. But with ED4, let's go kill Zamorak. Now, while Zamorak is probably the most impressive boss fight released to date, in my opinion, in terms of mechanics and depth and quality of the actual fight, it really is incredible. And not only that, the whole arena and the aesthetic of the place is insanely good and well done. I can't always help but feel like the whole of the Elite Dungeon 4 or the Zamarakian Undercity kind of came to a little bit of a waste, as this could have just been a boss encounter, because right now the dungeon is pretty much just wasted away and not used to its full potential. For example, today the only real reason to run the dungeon is one, you have to get one full run to be able to take on Zamorak in the first place, just one. This used to be a hell of a lot more. I believe it was 20 on release, and now it is just one because people saw this as a chore and not something to be enjoyed. And the only other real reasons for actually using the dungeon itself is going to be for farming tokens off of the first boss. You can get dungeoneering tokens for defeating the first Cerberus boss from the first corner, which is literally at the very first part of the dungeon. Like I've said first because it's you walk through, you don't even have to clear off a barrier, you just go directly there. And otherwise, maybe you would come here to collect slivers for the enchantments that you can get for other items across the game. However, many people probably just collect these from killing off the mages when you are going to take on Zamorak. As long as you have the lucky charms with you when you take on Zamorak, you have to kill the mages at the beginning, and these have the chance of dropping the slithers as well. This overall makes the dungeon itself kind of worthless to do. Now, for argument's sake, it is worth knowing that if you do complete the dungeon before taking on Zamorak, you will have an increased chance at getting a valuable or a rare drop from Zamorak himself. Not only that, but it will increase the amount of common loot that you get from the chest when you finish this as well. So technically, running the dungeon is going to actually increase the amount of loot you get per kill. That being said though, the dungeon is incredibly long to run for most players, and because this is high level content, you will be taking a ton of damage on most situations unless you're an absolute best in slot and are a very experienced PVMer and know where all of the good like lure spots or safe spots are through the dungeon, meaning you're going to be spending a lot of money on supplies as well. I used to run the dungeon for just fun because I enjoyed it a lot. I got to the point where I could probably do 2.5 runs per hour. This meant I could kill Zamorak 2 times per hour, or 2.5 if you wanted to count it exactly. Now, no matter what you do with running the dungeon here, this is never going to compete with just taking on Zamorak directly in terms of money output per hour. So running the dungeon itself is always a net loss overall if you ever are looking to make money through PVM. There's basically no reason to run the full dungeon and take on Zamorak when you could just kill him multiple times more if you just went in, skipped the fight to the end boss, and then took on Zamorak himself. This to me is why I feel like this dungeon is completely wasted. I mean, take a look at it. Look at this whole dungeon. How long do you think it took the devs to create this place? The artists sat there working on this for absolutely hours on end, designing this place look as amazing as it does. This is arguably, in my opinion, one of the best looking places in RuneScape. The whole dungeon ties together so perfectly. The mobs and monsters fit in amazingly well, and the whole place just feels really well done. Imagine if you were one of those devs and then Jagex just said, well, we're gonna allow everybody to skip this, just so you know, and then nobody ever really experienced that you worked on for all that time. Wouldn't you feel a little bit like fuming? I would be. I tell you what, bro, I would not be impressed. I mean, at the end of the day, I suppose they still got paid, but man, that's gotta feel bad. So now that we know that the only real reason to use the dungeon is to get your hands on some slithers, you can increase your loot as Zamorak, but it just really isn't worth it because you can just kill Zamorak more times, which is overall going to be better. Or to get yourself some dungeoneering tokens, the whole dungeon kind of feels wasted in terms of a boss encounter. Personally, to me, it feels like Jagex tried too hard with this sort of content to cater to all types of players, but also offer everything in one instance. It feels like they've made an amazing solo boss, group boss, and raid scaling boss, but also they've tried to make an elite dungeon at the same time and then mix them together, and it just hasn't really worked. You can't have one without the other. With the amount of time spent on the dungeon itself, you probably would have assumed that it could have been a better idea to have a different boss encounter at the end, and then maybe have Zamorak as a separate boss itself. Maybe you could have had a massive fight with, let's say, like an army of Zamorakian minions as the final boss. This doesn't even like really make sense, but whatever. Like, have a different sort of boss right at the end of the dungeon, which gives its own rewards, and you have to run the dungeon to be able to take this on. And then after that, maybe you can take on Zamorak itself. This would just mean that the dungeon is its own boss encounter, content release, or whatever, and then at the end, you could still have Zamorak as its own boss. Now, I'm not saying that's the perfect solution. In fact, I don't even personally think that it probably is, but it would have made sense to have Zamorak as its own boss encounter, and then with the amount of time and effort spent on the dungeon itself, not let it go to waste and become something that people never use or want to use and just let it sort of fade off into uselessness, rather than just design a separate boss to sit on the end of this that actually is valuable time spent. Personally, I think that elite dungeons are some of the most fun pieces of content in the game. I find it so much more enjoyable to go through an elite dungeon than it is to go into Raksha, for example, kill the boss in 2.5 minutes, teleport out, and then rinse and repeat for over an hour straight. The feeling of traveling through the dungeon and like having it all spread out and broken down at a different pace, to me, is just really nice. So I was actually rather disappointed that the Zamorakian Undercity came with a skip, and basically became dead content as soon as people unlocked Zamorak to be able to skip to him. That being said, there's also some ways that you could go ahead and fix this and make it a little bit more balanced. One, you could try and tune the loot to make it so that if you ran the dungeon, the amount of bonus loot you get out of this is equal to what you would get if you were just grinding the boss at a fairly average rate. Don't get me wrong, there's some pro level players that are going to smash through the boss insanely fast, and so you're probably not going to be able to compete with that. But on average, if you run the dungeon, you should probably be reaching the same amount of average loot that the players that are just killing the boss are going to get. Maybe you offer a separate loot drop that you can only get if you run the dungeon itself. Maybe make it so the pet can only drop if you fully cleared the dungeon first. That could be another option as well. Or have it so that one of the bow pieces that you can get only drops as well if you actually clear the entire dungeon. This way people would happily run this, and if you were an Iron Man, for example, you would be able to kill Zamorak himself with 2 pieces. Maybe you'd have to run the full dungeon to unlock the 3rd one. Now again, many people might think that is a terrible idea, but it could be anything. It could be a cosmetic override, it could be unlocking a different pet, possibly anything like that. Just give some incentive to have people actually run the dungeon, and then it would just be something people would do. If you don't want to balance the drop rates and the actual loot output to be pretty much the same from running the dungeon or for just doing the boss fight, then add something else to give players incentive to get themselves in there and get running. There's so many things Jagex could do, and probably some very quick fixes that they could do as well. It genuinely blows my mind, and it confuses me a hell of a lot as to why they don't make some changes to actually do this. Take a look at Vorkath. When Vorkath released, it was absolutely terrible. The feedback was insane, and people just said that it's not worth your time doing. It's going to be dead content if you don't make some changes. Jagex made those changes, and Vorkath became a hell of a lot more popular, even though it's probably still not overly popular today, but overall it became a lot more successful than when it released. There's no reason that you shouldn't go back and do this with Zamorak in Undercity. If not for any other reason than to respect the people that spent all of the time making this amazing location in the game and giving it some value and letting people see it more. It is an insanely well done area. It is a stupidly good piece of content in the game. To have it offer very little to no value at all, other than the one dungeon run that you have to do to unlock Zamorak, to then skip the dungeon that took hundreds of hours, I am sure, to actually fully make, just add something in the game that offers value for this. I feel like balancing it would definitely be more difficult to do than adding just a unique drop to the table for running the dungeon, but there should be something that makes it so that running the dungeon is absolutely worth it and stops this piece of content from being wasted for the amount of potential and enjoyment that can be had out of it. Anyway, I think I've ranted enough about this and spoke about it enough. I hope you found this entertaining or enjoyable. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think I'm just complaining for no reason? Or do you think that the hundreds, maybe even thousands of hours that went into designing this location should have maybe been used a little bit better? Don't forget to claim your free cosmetics, guys. The link in the pinned comment and the description. Thank you, Zola, again for sponsoring the video. And other than that, I'll catch you all in the next one. See you later, guys. Bye.